What if South Carolina's forests and marshes are not simply natural landscapes, but an ancient archive engineered in silence? What if perfect circles made of shell are older than many famous monuments, yet no one can agree why they exist? Who carved abstract symbols into open stone, circles, cup marks, spirals, without leaving a language to decode them? And why do some cultures build the same geometry for centuries, then stop almost abruptly? From the Hagod Mill petroglyphs to the shell rings of Hilton Head and Suey, and even the aligned Carolina bays that still provoke debate, the evidence is real. The meaning is missing. So what did history forget first? South Carolina is usually framed through familiar chapters of American history: colonial settlements, plantations, war, and statehood. But beneath that written record lies a far deeper layer of time, one that predates documents, borders, and even recorded language. It is a layer that survives not through words, but through altered landscapes. Long before European arrival, indigenous communities lived across this region for thousands of years. They moved with rivers and tides, organized their societies around seasonal cycles, and shaped their surroundings in ways that were deliberate, repeated, and enduring. What remains today is not legend. It is physical evidence: stone carved by human hands, earth raised into measured forms, shells arranged into precise geometry, and terrain subtly but intentionally transformed. What makes South Carolina distinct is not a single spectacular ruin, but a pattern. Along the coast, circular shell structures appear again and again, some nearly 4,000 years old, constructed with a level of consistency that suggests shared knowledge rather than coincidence. Inland, low but symmetrical earthen mounds cluster near rivers, indicating planned spaces tied to ceremony, governance, or community life. In wooded areas, exposed rock surfaces carry abstract carvings, circles, spirals, cup marks, etched without narrative scenes or recognizable figures. And across the broader coastal plain, elongated elliptical depressions known as Carolina bays stretch across the landscape, aligned in ways that continue to invite scrutiny. Archaeology confirms one essential fact: these features are real. They were not formed by accident nor invented by modern imagination. They are the result of human presence interacting with environment over long spans of time. Yet confirmation of existence does not equal understanding. In nearly every case, the cultural context that once explained these structures has disappeared. Languages vanished. Oral traditions were broken. Communities were displaced or absorbed. Meaning eroded faster than stone, shell, or soil. As a result, researchers are left to work indirectly. They analyze shape, scale, location, stratigraphy, and environmental relationships. From these fragments, theories emerge: permanent settlements, seasonal camps, ritual spaces, social boundaries, cosmological symbols, or calendars tied to sun, moon, and tide. Each explanation is plausible. None is definitive. The 10 cases that follow do not challenge archaeology. They define its limits. Together, they reveal a consistent reality. History is not a complete record. It is a reconstruction assembled from what survived disruption, erosion, and silence. These sites do not ask us to abandon science. They ask something more restrained and more difficult. They ask whether the past we think we understand is only a partial inheritance, and how much human knowledge can exist, function, and disappear without ever being written down. 1. Hagod Mill Rock Carvings, York, Pickens County, South Carolina. Hidden among trees near Hagod Mill Historic Site, a flat rock surface carries markings that do not announce themselves. There are no figures, no animals, no scenes of hunting or daily life. Instead, the stone is covered with abstract forms, concentric circles, shallow cup marks, short grooves, and faint spirals. At first glance, they appear simple. With time, they become unsettling. These carvings, classified as petroglyphs, are unusual not because of their complexity, but because of their restraint. Many rock carvings across the world depict stories or symbols that clearly reference people, gods, or animals. The Hagod Mill carvings do none of that. They offer no narrative. They offer no obvious instruction. They exist as patterns without explanation. One of the most striking aspects of the site is its exposure. These carvings were not hidden inside caves or protected by overhangs. They sit out in the open, vulnerable to rain, sun, and seasonal change. And yet they have survived. The lines are weathered, softened by centuries of erosion, but still visible. Their persistence raises an immediate question. If these symbols were meant to be temporary, why were they placed where they could endure? And if they were meant to last, who were they meant for? The arrangement suggests intention. The symbols are not scattered randomly. They appear in clusters, with slight variations in size and depth. Some circles are only a few inches wide. Others expand outward in multiple rings. This variation has led researchers to consider whether the carvings were created over long periods of time, possibly by different generations returning to the same stone. The rock may have functioned less like a single artwork and more like a communal surface, revisited, reinterpreted, and added to over centuries. Interpretations remain cautious. Some scholars suggest the circles represent cycles, seasons, life and death, movement through time. Others propose a cosmological meaning, possibly tied to the sky, water sources, or sacred geography. There are even theories that the markings served as territorial or social indicators. Each idea fits part of the evidence. None fully explains the whole. What makes the Hagud Mill carvings compelling is not what they say, but what they refuse to clarify. The people who made them did not leave a language behind. Whatever stories once accompanied these symbols were carried orally and disappeared when those voices fell silent. Today, the stone remains, bearing marks that are undeniably human, yet stubbornly opaque. Standing in front of the carvings, one realization becomes difficult to avoid. These symbols worked. They served their purpose within a world that no longer exists. The failure is not theirs. It is ours, arriving centuries later, trying to read meaning from a surface that was never meant to explain itself without its culture still alive. 2. Sui, Shell Mounds, Central Coast of South Carolina, Yachts. Along the tidal marshes of South Carolina's Central Coast, the landscape appears quiet and unassuming. Low rises blend into grasses and mudflats. At first glance, nothing signals human design. Then the ground changes underfoot. It crunches. White and gray fragments appear everywhere. What looks like natural debris slowly reveals itself as something far more deliberate. These are the Sui shell mounds, built primarily from oyster shells and accumulated over long spans of time by indigenous coastal communities. They are not isolated piles. They are structured landforms, broad, layered, and persistent, created through repeated human activity across generations. Archaeological investigation shows that these mounds are not random refuse. The shells are densely packed, often layered with soil, ash, and cultural materials such as pottery fragments, tools, and animal bones. Fire pits appear at different depths. Some layers reflect periods of heavy use, others quieter intervals. This stratification indicates continuity rather than disposal, life returning to the same place again and again. One practical interpretation is environmental adaptation. Coastal South Carolina floods easily. Storm surges, high tides, and seasonal rains can turn flat ground into waterlogged terrain. Raised platforms made of compacted shell would have provided stable, dry ground for dwellings and communal activity. From this perspective, the mounds functioned as engineered foundations, solutions to a challenging environment. But this explanation alone falls short. Many of the mounds are far larger than necessary for household platforms. Their scale suggests collective effort beyond everyday needs. In some cases, the location of the mounds offers expansive views across marsh channels and waterways, positioning them as focal points rather than simple living surfaces. This has led to another line of interpretation: ceremony and symbolism. In many coastal indigenous traditions, shells carried meaning beyond sustenance. They were associated with cycles, renewal, water, and transition. Building monumental features from shell may have transformed daily subsistence into ritualized practice, turning food remains into enduring markers of identity and place. There is also the question of time. These mounds were not constructed quickly. They grew slowly, layer by layer, as generations returned to the same sites. That repetition implies memory. The mound itself became a record, each layer preserving traces of meals, gatherings, celebrations, and loss. What deepens the mystery is silence. The Sioux people suffered rapid population decline following European contact through disease, displacement, and disruption. The oral traditions that once explained these mounds did not survive in written form. Without those stories, archaeologists are left to infer purpose from structure alone. Today, erosion steadily reduces what remains. Rising sea levels and storm activity have already claimed parts of the original landscape. What survives does so unevenly, fragment by fragment. Yet even diminished, the shell mounds retain weight. They are reminders that complex human systems can exist without permanence, and that meaning can vanish while structure remains. The Sioux shell mounds do not tell us exactly how they were used, but they make one fact unavoidable. These were not temporary camps. They were places where life returned repeatedly, long enough to reshape the land itself. 3. PD Cultural Mound Sites, Inland River Systems of South Carolina. Moving inland from the coast, the geography of South Carolina changes. Marsh gives way to river valleys, broad floodplains, and forests shaped by slow seasonal water. In these interior regions, another kind of ancient structure appears, far less dramatic than coastal shell rings, yet no less deliberate. Scattered along rivers associated with the PD watershed are low, symmetrical earthen mounds attributed to what archaeologists call the PD cultural tradition, part of the broader Mississippian world of the southeastern United States. These mounds rarely rise high above the surrounding ground. Many look like gentle hills. Without trained attention, they are easy to miss. But their form is not natural. Unlike hills shaped by erosion, these mounds show consistent geometry. Their soil is compacted differently from the surrounding earth. In some locations, fragments of pottery, stone tools, and burned material appear near the surface, quiet indicators of organized human activity. The symmetry alone signals intention. Someone planned these spaces. Someone returned to them. What makes the PD mound sites especially enigmatic is how little they have been disturbed. Many remain unexcavated, either because they sit on private land or because modern archaeology has chosen restraint over intrusion. As a result, each mound functions as a sealed archive. We know they were built. We know roughly when. But we do not know what lies inside. To understand what these mounds might have been, archaeologists often look beyond South Carolina to a closely related site just across the state line, Town Creek Indian Mound. There, excavation revealed a carefully organized ceremonial center, a central mound topped by a council or temple structure surrounded by open plazas used for gatherings, rituals, and governance. The site was rebuilt multiple times over centuries, then abandoned without clear explanation. The PD mounds likely followed a similar logic. Their placement near rivers suggests more than convenience. Rivers were transportation routes, food sources, and spiritual boundaries. A mound positioned near a bend or confluence may have marked a sacred point in the landscape, a place where social, political, and spiritual life converged. Yet without excavation, interpretation remains suspended. Were these burial mounds honoring leaders or ancestors? Were they platforms for ceremonial buildings? Were they seasonal gathering points for dispersed communities? Or did their function change over time, shifting as the society itself evolved? What is certain is that these mounds required coordination and long-term thinking. Earth had to be moved, shaped, and maintained. This was not casual labor. It reflects a society capable of organizing effort across generations, people building not just for themselves, but for those who would come after. Today, the PD mounds sit quietly. Fields have grown around them. Forests have reclaimed them. Few signs mark their presence, but the silence is misleading. These structures represent one of the clearest examples of lost context in the region, places whose physical form survived while their purpose did not. They remind us that disappearance does not always come with destruction. Sometimes a culture fades and its architecture remains intact, unreadable, and waiting. 4. Hilton Head Prehistoric Shell Rings, South Carolina Lowcountry. On Hilton Head Island, beyond resorts and manicured neighborhoods, pockets of forest still preserve something far older than modern development. Beneath leaf litter and live oak canopies lie circular formations that do not belong to the natural order. These are prehistoric shell rings, some approaching 4,000 years in age, and they remain among the most puzzling structures in the southeastern United States. At ground level, the rings are subtle. Low walls of compacted shell rise only a few feet in places, but once their outline becomes clear, the geometry is unmistakable. The rings form broad circles, often enclosing a central open space. Shell fragments, oyster, clam, and whelk, are packed so tightly that soil and calcium have fused them into a hardened mass. Even after millennia of erosion, the curves hold. The precision raises immediate questions. These were not casual accumulations. If the rings were simply the byproduct of daily meals, their shape would be irregular. Instead, they are deliberate, consistent. Repeated across multiple sites along the coast, someone understood circular space and returned to it again and again. The most common explanation is practical settlement. Homes may have been arranged around a central plaza, with shells gradually accumulating along the perimeter. Over generations, the refuse hardened into a ring. This interpretation explains the domestic materials found within the structure and aligns with known patterns of communal living. But the explanation is incomplete. Many rings are larger and more symmetrical than necessary for simple villages. In several cases, the interior space appears intentionally cleared. Some rings have distinct entry points. Others show height variation that suggests design rather than accident. These features imply planning that goes beyond convenience. As a result, many researchers consider a ceremonial function. In coastal indigenous cultures, shells were not neutral material. They symbolized water, renewal, and cyclical time. A circular form built from shell may have represented seasonal rhythms tied to tides, lunar cycles, or migration patterns. The enclosed space could have served as a boundary, separating ritual from everyday life. What deepens the mystery is the sudden end of the tradition. Around 3,000 years ago, shell ring construction stops. Not gradually, not unevenly. Across the region, the pattern disappears. The people did not vanish, but the architectural form did. Something changed, socially, environmentally, or spiritually, yet the archaeological record offers no single cause. Environmental stress is one possibility. Shifts in sea level, resource availability, or storm patterns may have altered coastal lifeways. Another theory suggests cultural transformation, communities reorganizing, adopting new social structures, or moving inland. None can be confirmed. Today, the Hilton Head shell rings sit in quiet contrast to the modern world built around them. Roads, homes, and golf courses exist within minutes of structures that predate writing in North America. The rings do not announce themselves. They do not explain themselves. They endure. Their power lies in that endurance. They show that complex spatial thinking existed long before recorded history and that entire systems of meaning can disappear while their geometry remains intact. 5. Topper Site, Allendale County, South Carolina. Along the banks of the Savannah River, in a landscape that appears unremarkable at first glance, lies Topper Site, one of the most controversial archaeological locations in North America. Unlike shell rings or earthen mounds, the mystery here is not about purpose or symbolism. It is about time. For decades, the dominant model of human arrival in North America centered on the Clovis culture, dated to roughly 13,000 years ago. According to that framework, earlier occupation was unlikely or unsupported. The Topper Site challenges that assumption. Excavations at Topper uncovered stone tools and worked lithic material beneath confirmed Clovis layers. Some of these deeper artifacts were dated to thousands of years earlier. If the interpretations are correct, they suggest that humans were present in the southeast well before the traditionally accepted timeline. That implication is profound. It would mean migration routes were more complex. It would mean adaptation to diverse environments happened earlier than expected. And it would force a reconsideration of how quickly early populations spread across the continent. But this is where certainty collapses. Critics argue that the deepest materials may not be tools at all. They may be naturally fractured stones, products of geological processes rather than human hands. In archaeology, this distinction is critical. A single misidentified object can distort an entire chronology. As a result, the Topper site has become a fault line within the discipline itself. Supporters point to repeated patterns in flaking, edgeware, and spatial clustering that resemble intentional tool production. Skeptics counter that without unequivocal human features, such as hearths, bones, or structural remains, the evidence remains ambiguous. The debate is not about ideology. It is about standards of proof. What makes Topper compelling is not that it has rewritten history, but that it exposes how fragile historical frameworks can be. Archaeology relies on layered assumptions, dating methods, artifact classification, and contextual integrity. When one layer is questioned, everything above it becomes uncertain. Standing at the site today, there is nothing dramatic to see. No monumental architecture, no visible ruins, just soil, sediment, and riverbank. Yet beneath that quiet surface lies a question that refuses to settle. How early did humans adapt to this landscape? Us all. Whether Topper ultimately proves pre-Clovis occupation or not, its significance remains. It represents the boundary between what is accepted and what is still possible. It reminds us that absence of consensus does not equal absence of history. Sometimes the past is present but not yet agreed upon. 6. Sui Shell Ring, Awendaw, South Carolina. Not far from the Atlantic coast, within the low forests and wetlands of Francis Marion National Forest, lies a structure that is easy to overlook unless you know precisely what to look for. The Sui Shell Ring does not rise dramatically from the ground. It does not announce itself with stone walls or towering earthworks, yet once its outline becomes clear, it is impossible to dismiss. The ring measures roughly 150 feet in diameter, with shell walls rising up to 3 meters above the surrounding terrain. Composed primarily of oyster shells, it dates to approximately 4,000 years ago, placing it among the oldest known human-made structures in the region. Its form is unmistakably circular, not approximate, not eroded into shape by chance. Circular by design. As with other shell rings along the South Carolina and Georgia coasts, the central question is deceptively simple. What was it for? One explanation frames the ring as a residential village. Houses may have been arranged along the circular wall, facing inward toward a shared central space. Over generations, discarded shells accumulated along the perimeter, slowly creating the raised ring visible today. This interpretation aligns with evidence of daily life, food remains, tools, and traces of repeated occupation. But the symmetry complicates this view. Waste rarely organizes itself so cleanly. The height consistency of the ring, the maintained openness of the interior, and the clear boundary between inside and outside suggest planning. Someone understood spatial order. Someone maintained it. This has led to interpretations that emphasize ritual. In many coastal indigenous societies, shells carried symbolic weight tied to water, cycles, and continuity. Constructing a circle from shell may have transformed subsistence activity into something ceremonial, turning repeated harvesting into a visible statement of belonging and rhythm. The ring itself may have functioned as a gathering space, a seasonal marker, or a boundary between ordinary life and communal ritual. There is also the question of repetition. The Sui Shell Ring is not unique. Similar rings appear across the southeast, separated by distance but united by form. This suggests shared knowledge, ideas transmitted between communities rather than invented in isolation. Yet there is no evidence of centralized authority or written coordination. Whatever knowledge guided these structures moved person to person, generation to generation, without leaving a textual trace. What remains today is a structure officially recognized and protected, yet still fundamentally unexplained. Visitors can walk the perimeter, stand within the circle, and sense the enclosure, but not the intent. The people who built it did not disappear suddenly. Their cultural descendants persisted, but the practice of building shell rings ended. The Sui Shell Ring embodies a recurring theme in South Carolina's ancient landscape: architecture without explanation. A form precise enough to demand interpretation, and a silence deep enough to resist it. 7. Pacoy Island Shell Rings, Edisto Island, South Carolina. For decades, large portions of South Carolina's coastal past remained invisible, not because they were destroyed, but because they were hidden by vegetation and subtle topography. That changed with the use of modern remote sensing technology. In 2017, LiDAR surveys revealed something unexpected on Pacoy Island: faint circular elevations buried beneath forest cover and marsh edge. What emerged were two prehistoric shell rings, now known as Pacoy 1 and Pacoy 2. Subsequent investigation identified Pacoy 1 as potentially the oldest shell ring yet documented in South Carolina, dated to approximately 4,300 years ago. That date places it among the earliest large-scale human landscape modifications in the region. The discovery itself highlights a crucial point. These structures were not found because they stood out. They were found because technology learned how to look differently. From ground level, the rings blend into the terrain. From above, their geometry becomes unmistakable. Like other shell rings, the Pacoy structures are composed primarily of oyster shell, tightly packed and layered over long periods. Their circular form is deliberate. Their placement near tidal waterways suggests close integration with coastal resources, yet their age raises difficult questions. If shell rings represent complex social organization, that organization existed far earlier than once assumed for coastal societies in this region. Excavation at Pacoy has been cautious and limited. Partly this is methodological restraint. Partly it is necessity. Coastal erosion is already cutting into the site. Storm surges and rising sea levels threaten to remove entire sections before they can be studied. In this sense, Pacoy Island represents a race against time, evidence emerging just as it risks being erased. Interpretations follow familiar paths. The rings may have served as seasonal gathering places tied to oyster harvesting cycles. They may have functioned as ceremonial spaces where community identity was reinforced, or they may have been both, spaces where subsistence, ritual, and social organization overlapped. What distinguishes Pacoy Island is not just age, but implication. If people were building permanent, geometrically consistent structures at this scale more than 4 millennia ago, then assumptions about social complexity in early coastal North America require adjustment. These were not transient groups leaving accidental traces. They were communities capable of planning, repetition, and long-term presence. Yet once again, meaning does not survive intact. No artifacts explain why the ring was circular rather than linear. No oral record clarifies why construction stopped. What remains is shape, placement, and pattern, data without narrative. Pacoy Island's shell rings demonstrate a recurring truth. Sometimes the past is not rediscovered in archives or texts, but briefly illuminated by technology, just long enough to remind us how much has already been lost. 8 Fig Island Shell Ring Complex, Rockville, South Carolina. South of Charleston, near the community of Rockville, lies one of the most expansive and structurally complex shell ring sites in North America, the Fig Island Shell Ring Complex. Unlike isolated rings found elsewhere along the coast, Fig Island contains multiple rings arranged within a single landscape, forming a system rather than a solitary structure. The complex consists of 3 major shell rings, each constructed primarily from oyster shell and separated by short distances. Their combined scale immediately sets Fig Island apart. This was not a small temporary settlement. It was a place that required coordination, repeated labor, and sustained occupation over long periods of time. From above, the geometry becomes clear. Each ring maintains a recognizable circular form, and together they create a pattern that suggests planning rather than coincidence. The repetition of shape implies shared rules. Guidelines followed across construction phases, possibly across generations. This raises an essential question. What kind of social organization was capable of producing and maintaining this level of spatial consistency without written plans or centralized authority? Archaeological evidence indicates that Fig Island was used intensively. Shell layers are thick and compacted. Cultural materials, tools, pottery fragments, and animal remains appear in multiple strata. The density suggests that people return to this place repeatedly, not just seasonally, but across extended spans of time. The rings were not abandoned after brief use, they were maintained. One interpretation views the site as a large multi-community gathering space. Different rings may have served different groups, functions, or ceremonial purposes. Another possibility is chronological expansion, new rings added as population grew or social structures changed. Both interpretations point to a dynamic landscape, one that evolved alongside the people who shaped it. As with other shell ring sites, debate continues over function. Were these rings residential zones, ritual boundaries, or symbolic markers tied to cycles of time and tide? The presence of open central spaces within the rings supports the idea of communal activity, yet the sheer size of the complex suggests more than everyday living. Fig Island feels deliberate in a way that implies meaning beyond convenience. What makes Fig Island particularly significant is its state of preservation. Compared to many coastal sites, its rings remain clearly defined. This clarity allows archaeologists to study form and relationship in ways not possible elsewhere. Even so, clarity of structure has not translated into clarity of interpretation. Still, no evidence explains why circles were chosen instead of lines or clusters. No artifact identifies who decided where each ring would be placed, and no record explains why shell ring construction so prominent here eventually ceased. Fig Island stands as a reminder that scale does not guarantee understanding. Even when a site is large, organized, and well-preserved, its purpose can remain opaque. The landscape holds the outline of a complex social system, but the system itself has dissolved, leaving only geometry behind. 9. Edisto Shell Rings, Edisto Island, South Carolina. On Edisto Island, the most revealing aspect of the ancient landscape is not immediately visible from the ground. Walking through forest and marsh, the terrain feels uneven but ordinary. Only when the perspective changes, through aerial survey, mapping, or elevation models, does the pattern emerge. Circular forms appear where none seemed to exist before. These are the Edisto shell rings, among the oldest human-made features along the southeastern coast of North America. Like other shell rings in the region, they are built primarily from oyster shells and date back several thousand years. But unlike more prominent examples, many Edisto rings are subtle, eroded, and partially reclaimed by vegetation. Their true shape is often only apparent from above. This reliance on perspective is central to their mystery. For centuries, these structures went unnoticed not because they were destroyed, but because they blended too well into the land. From ground level, they appear as low rises or scattered shell deposits. From the air, they resolve into intentional geometry. The rings were always there. The ability to recognize them came later. Archaeological study confirms that these formations are not accidental. The shells are densely packed and consistently distributed along curved paths. In several cases, the interiors are lower than the surrounding ring, suggesting intentional clearing or maintenance. These traits argue against the idea of random refuse accumulation and instead point toward planned construction. As with other shell rings, interpretations diverge. One view holds that the rings mark residential organization, homes arranged in a circle around a shared space. Another emphasizes ritual, circles as symbolic forms tied to cycles of water, season, and renewal. A third suggests multi-purpose use, where daily life and ceremony overlapped in the same architectural space. What complicates interpretation at Edisto is fragmentation. Coastal erosion, rising sea levels, and development have altered the original landscape. Some rings are incomplete. Others survive only as partial arcs. This makes it difficult to determine their original size, entrances, or relationship to nearby features. Context has been physically removed. Yet even in fragments, the pattern persists. Multiple rings appear across the Edisto area, reinforcing the idea that this was not an isolated experiment. It was part of a broader coastal tradition, one repeated often enough to leave a regional signature. The Edisto shell rings underscore a recurring limitation in archaeology. Visibility does not equal importance. Some of the most consequential human modifications to the landscape are the easiest to overlook. They do not rise upward. They spread outward. They wait for the right angle to be understood, yet dull. And once seen, they introduce a difficult realization. Entire systems of knowledge, how space was organized, how communities gathered, how meaning was assigned to form, can exist, function, and vanish without ever becoming obvious to those who come later. 10. Carolina Bays, the coastal plain of South Carolina. Stretching across the coastal plain of the southeastern United States, including large portions of South Carolina coastal plain, are thousands of shallow depressions known as Carolina Bays. From the ground, they appear as wetlands, ponds, or low-lying fields. From above, a striking pattern emerges: elongated elliptical shapes consistently oriented along a northwest-southeast axis. This consistency is what has kept Carolina Bays at the center of debate for more than a century. Unlike the previous discoveries, Carolina Bays are not clearly human-made structures. No tools, shells, or construction layers define them, yet their geometry feels engineered. Many share similar proportions. Many are aligned in the same direction across vast distances. And many exist in regions where no obvious natural mechanism seems sufficient at first glance. Over time, numerous explanations have been proposed. Early theories ranged from meteor impacts to catastrophic cosmic events. Modern geology offers more restrained interpretations: long-term wind and water processes acting on shallow basins during periods of different climate conditions, gradually shaping the depressions into their current forms. From a scientific standpoint, these explanations are largely accepted. But the unease remains. If the bays are entirely natural, why are they so uniform across such a wide area? Why do they repeat the same orientation regardless of local terrain? And why do they coexist in regions where ancient peoples were clearly altering the landscape in other deliberate ways? For archaeologists and historians, Carolina Bays occupy a boundary space. They are not evidence of lost civilizations or forgotten technologies, but they demonstrate how easily human perception can be drawn toward intentionality when patterns repeat at scale. They also serve as a reminder that not every mystery needs a human origin to feel unresolved. What matters most is not whether Carolina Bays were made by people. It is that they shaped the environments where people lived. Many bays became wetlands rich in resources. Some were used for hunting, fishing, or settlement nearby. Over time, human activity and natural form intertwined, blurring the line between constructed landscape and inherited terrain. In the context of South Carolina's ancient past, Carolina Bays act as a counterpoint. After examining carvings, mounds, and shell rings built by human hands, the bays remind us that not all patterns are messages, and that discernment is part of understanding history honestly. When evidence remains but meaning does not. Across South Carolina, these 10 sites share a common trait. They are not myths. They are not rumors. They are real places, shaped by human presence or encountered by human societies, preserved just enough to be studied, but never enough to be fully understood. Abstract symbols carved into exposed stone, shell rings built with geometric precision then abandoned, earthen mounds raised beside rivers and left unopened, coastal structures revealed by technology just as erosion begins to erase them, and landscapes that appear designed yet resist simple explanation. Individually, none of these discoveries overturn archaeology. They do not prove lost super-civilizations, impossible knowledge, or forgotten global empires. That is not their significance. Their power lies elsewhere. Together, they reveal a consistent pattern. History is not a complete record. It is a reconstruction built from what survived erosion, disruption, displacement, and silence. Structure often outlasts meaning. Geometry remains when language fails. Context disappears faster than earth, stone, or shell. These sites do not ask us to replace science with speculation. They ask for intellectual humility. They remind us that entire systems of knowledge can exist, function, and vanish without ever being written down, and that the absence of explanation does not imply the absence of intelligence. The danger is not in asking difficult questions of the past. The danger is answering them too quickly. Because one day, long after our own structures remain, others may stand where we once lived, surrounded by evidence, searching for meaning, and discovering that what we failed to preserve was not what we built, but what we understood.